gravity and can't, in the absence of matter, I should say, then you can measure it from here. It's a little uncomfortable place, but if you move out, no, if you move the chair out, you also move this chair out. And we came to the conclusion that the following metric solves the Einstein equations, which in fact take the form r mu nu equals 0 since there is no t mu. And we discussed how this describes the space-time either outside a star or a planet or anything that is spherically symmetric. Or in principle it could describe a space-time all the way down to the region r equals 2gm, which would be a very strange object, extremely dense, so that all its matter is concentrated in a radius less than 2gm. And we saw that for the Earth, the value of 2gm is about a centimeter, as to be contrasted with the size of the Earth. So the matter of the Earth lies far outside this radius. But you could imagine some exotic object whose matter is concentrated inside this radius. Yeah, you can probably get a chair. Actually, this is something I have not talked about. But let's try to get a few chairs. And we'll just get it from any of the artists. What happened? Old hall was better. For you maybe, but this is better for me. So, seriously, it was better, we'll go back to it. But I hate lecturing in a big university one. It's just because of this, or? I don't know. What? AG80. The small one. Why is that better?
Cold reason.
Cold and what's better? Larger rooms are better. Okay, let's try this out for a couple of days.
AG80 is small.
Okay, anyway, okay. Now, so here's the metric, and now the question that we would like to ask in this talk is what is going to be the physical motion of a particle that is placed in this space-time? Answer in one word is geodesic motion. Always that. So the only question then is what is the geodesic equation? Now the geodesic equations of a metric can be written down. So the geodesic equations can always be written down because the equations are just this. Now we have 4 coordinates. T, R, theta, phi, and we just need to calculate all the gammas, and we've already done that in the form of, if you remember, some functions alpha and e to the alpha and e to the beta which appear over here. But now we just need to plug in the concrete form of e to the alpha and e to the beta, and we'll find a bunch of connections, gammas. And just for completeness, I might as well write them down here. Is the kind of thing that we will do less and less when we deal with more and more complicated space-times, because actually today we are not going to need it very much. But it's good just for discipline to feel that we can write these things down. And in this particular solution, they are very easy to calculate, so there's no issue with that. So that's 2 of them. Then there's gamma R, R, R. This is that. Then there's gamma, the remaining gammas, okay. Then there's gamma r phi phi. Did I write gamma r theta theta? R theta theta is just that. Then there's gamma r phi phi, which is the same as r theta theta times some simple factor. And there's gamma theta phi phi. Okay, so this is one bunch of them. Then there are four more. Might as well do it. Gamma theta r theta, which is the same as gamma phi r phi is 1 by r. Gamma theta. These we've already written down, and these didn't depend on the arbitrary functions. These come from the, if you like, from the spherically symmetric, the two-sphere part. So I'm just writing them again. All others that I haven't written would be 0. So I hope it's clear how to write all of these. We had already got, for example, this was alpha prime, okay, where alpha is such that e to the 2 alpha is this factor. So alpha is half of log of this factor differentiated in r, and hopefully you get that. Just rewrite whatever you had before, okay, and you get a bunch of these. And now you simply have to write down these kind of equations. Let me give you one example. I won't write down all of them. So the geodesic equation, for example, we have r double dot for the radial coordinate, which is the most interesting, plus then there will be a term gamma r times r dot square. In that we'll plug in this factor. Then there will be a term gamma r t times t dot square. Then there will be a term gamma r theta theta times theta dot square, and a term gamma r phi phi times phi dot square. The whole thing is 0. Here, dot means what? Derivative in what? Proper time. Whatever is the parameter along the geodesic, which is up to us, but we'll treat it as the proper time. And this, as you know, we can do conveniently only if the particle is massive. And going through the literature, I found that I'm not very happy with the treatments where massive and massless particles are treated sort of in the same discussion. So I want to do a whole separate discussion on massless particles, and I'll do that next time. So of course it's true that if you take the limit carefully, then you can go to a massless particle by taking m to 0, but the limit is pretty subtle, and so we'll do that next time. And so this time we only discuss particles with mass Okay, so here's the equation, and I just have to plug in these gammas from here. In this particular case, there are no gammas with mixed lower indices, but if there were, you should never forget that there's a 2 in front. Okay, for example, gamma r, if there was gamma r theta, it would multiply r dot theta dot, but there would be a 2, because this can be r and this can be theta, or this can be theta and this can be r. Don't forget those things. Anyway, what you get at the end of it, a bunch of 4 second order partial differential equations. They are not in the least bit linear, because explicitly you can see squares in first derivatives, thus the gammas depend on t, r, theta and phi. Through these kind of things, which as you see are functions like 1 by r square and all that. So nothing is linear at all. So it's an unpleasant bunch of 4 partial differential equations. equations.
Sorry, what is a partial
Sorry, excuse me, I shouldn't have said that. There are a bunch of 4 ordinary second order, I shouldn't have said that. Bunch of ordinary second order differential equations in tau, but they are coupled and they are in 4 variables, 4 different variables. So it's really coupled ordinary differential equations, which is surely better than PDEs, but not by much. It's an unpleasant job to try and disentangle such things. However, such things are not unfamiliar to us from ordinary classical mechanics. Okay? Because if I give you a Lagrangian of the form T minus V for a particle moving in 4 dimensions, okay, what will you get as the Euler-Lagrange equations? You will get a bunch of 4 coupled ordinary differential equations in time. Here it's not time but tau, but as far as the mathematics is concerned, not much difference. Okay, and the question is, what do we do over there? Given a particle moving in some arbitrary potential, what do? Do we actually write down the 4 coupled equations and try to solve them, or do we try to be a little bit smarter? Okay, and as you know, there are 2 things we do which are absolutely crucial, both in classical mechanics and then even more crucial in quantum mechanics, where we would have got nowhere without them. And the 2 things we do are to make use of conservation of energy and angular momentum. Physically, conservation of energy provides the first integral of these equations and reduces the system to first order differential equation instead of second order, so only d by dt and not d2 by dt square appears. What angular momentum does, in a way, just to say in very simple words, is to confine the motion, for example, in a central force, which is why the angular momentum is conserved in the first place. Spherical symmetry is the reason. It confines the motion to a plane. Once the motion is in a plane, then one of the coordinates is lost. Okay? Just think that if you have a spherical object, we're looking for particle motion and we know that it's in a plane, so we can always choose that plane to be this plane, the equatorial plane. Okay? In that case, for all time, the particle will have the theta coordinate fixed to be pi by 2 in my conventions. Theta goes from 0 to pi. So we'll fix it at pi by 2 and thereafter theta is gone. It still leaves 3 variables, so it's not absolutely trivial, but things are much simpler. So we are going to do the same here, except that in general relativity, you have to be a little careful what you mean by conserved energy and angular momentum. But happily we've addressed that question in the last lecture or the lecture before that, when we said that what we mean by conserved quantities is killing vectors. So if there's a killing vector for something, it will lead to a conserved quantity. So therefore, we basically abandon this whole thing and forget about trying to solve these equations. So I was just wasting your time writing them. And we go back and say, what are the killing vectors of this metric? So as you remember, a killing vector is a vector k mu such that this equation is true. This one is indeed a partial differential equation and a whole set of them. But again, this is not the way we will discover a killing vector. A much better way to discover a killing vector is not to look for all solutions of that, but to think a little bit what it means. And in fact, we've already done the thinking, because this equation comes from the fact that x mu being shifted infinitesimally to x mu plus k mu of x leaves the metric unchanged. Okay. And the special case when k mu is constant in some coordinate system is even more appealing, because then it's just a constant translation of x which leaves the metric unchanged, and such a constant translation is easy to spot. If it was not a constant translation, then we would have to look at dx. Dx could change. If it's a constant translation, dx doesn't change. So in the metric, I only have to look at the coefficient functions here, here, here and here and ask what are they independent of. And now you see that at least 2 of these are staring you in the face. So first, let's think of it this way. Given a function f of x mu under this shift, the function becomes f of x mu plus k mu, which is infinitesimal, so it's approximately f of x plus k mu del by del x mu f. Okay, so what it says is, given the vector k, if k mu del by del x mu on f is 0, then that function can be said to be invariant under the symmetry generated by the Killing vector. In this language, you can also, if you remember, in Nitin Nitsure's talks, mathematicians always think of vector fields as being differential operators k mu d by dx. This is the reason. Where they think of a vector field as shifting the coordinate by an infinitesimal amount. But when you do that, then its action on any function is by the differential operator k mu d by dx. So some people, if you look in the literature, will refer to k mu as the Killing vector, and some will refer to the whole thing k mu d by dx mu as the Killing vector. So let's try to get familiar with both languages. Physically, time translation is a symmetry of this metric because it's explicitly time independent. So that means that the Killing vector is del by del t, or equivalently k mu is 1, 0, 0, 0. The same statement, because if this is true, then k mu d by dx mu is that. So here's one Killing vector. Okay. So for now, for this lecture, I'll use k mu to refer to this particular one, the time Killing vector. There's another Killing vector which is very obvious, which is d by d phi. That's again, phi is completely missing from this. So a constant shift in phi gives me a Killing vector. So d by d phi, or equivalently, this time we'll give it a name r mu. It's 0, 0, 0, 1 because our coordinate system is t r theta phi. Okay. Now this one we understand, this is rotational invariance, one of the three rotational invariances. Now in principle, we could spend our time looking for two more Killing vectors. We know they have to be there. They are not d by d phi, which rotates the sphere in this way, but they are the rotation about the other two axes. Okay. So we could spend our time looking for those, but turns out we don't need to do that. Okay. We don't actually need the other two Killing vectors. The reason is that instead of finding them and then deducing what are the physical consequences, we can guess the physical consequences because we already know some physics. Okay, what are the consequences of the fact that this metric, this space-time, is spherically symmetric? Okay, the consequence is that all three components of angular momentum are conserved. Okay, and in fact, the associated Killing vector, the associated conserved quantities to these Killing vectors, the energy, conserved energy is k mu p mu, and the conserved angular momentum L is r mu p mu. We've already seen this. But remember that these are the lowered components of these vectors, while here they are given in their raised form. So you have to use the metric to lower them. These are the conserved E and L. Okay, but this is, what does it mean? What L is this? If this r mu is the phi rotation, then this is L along the z axis. Fine. Okay, but since this whole thing is spherically symmetric, the motion of a particle in this is going to be the particle motion in a central force. Okay, and in a central force, one second. What? Sorry.
Scale the angular moment.
Yes. I'll keep calling it L, but it's the Z angular momentum. Yeah, tell me.
Here, how do we consider that in a 4-dimensional space?
Yes.
There will be always 4 keylings.
No, not this. There can be more, there can be less.
But
This space has 4, just because it has 4, no reason, no other reason. We know the reason actually. We asked for it to have 3 Killing vectors because we said it has to be spherically symmetric. When we solved the equation, we encountered Birkhoff's theorem, which said it's time dependent, so we got one time independent, so we got 1 Killing vector for free, so we got 4. There could have been some more. Let me give you an example. This is not boost invariant. Okay? You could have a boost between space and time. This is not boost invariant. You can check that for yourself. So that's 1 Killing vector that's not there, but Minkowski space is boost invariant. Okay? So Minkowski space has how many Killing vectors? 10 actually. 10. 4-dimensional space, it has 10 Killing vectors. Turns out actually the maximum possible number is 10 in 4-dimensional space. So this only has 4. Okay. What I was saying is that knowing these two things, we can proceed because we know that the motion of a particle in such a metric will be confined to a plane. Okay. What plane it is depends on all 3 components of the angular momentum. In particular, we would need to know the direction of the total angular momentum to decide what plane the motion is confined in. Okay, but instead of that, what we'll do is let's take the direction of the angular momentum to be arbitrary, and now let's rotate our coordinate system so that that direction is Z. Just rotate our coordinate system to coincide. In other words, without any loss of generality, we consider angular momenta such that only Lz is non-zero, Lx and Ly are 0. You can always do that. Okay, so we choose coordinates. Okay. Once that is so, we are sure that the particle motion will be in the equatorial plane. So we, in all our equations, we impose that condition that theta is pi by 2. Thereafter, we don't need to know anything about these other 2 Killing vectors, and these 2 Killing vectors will help us solve the problem completely. Calling it xy, of course we have xyz or r theta phi, because you can go back and forth between them. So xy plane, which is the same as theta equals pi by 2. So henceforth, fix theta equals pi by 2. Okay. Now this is fine, but given that say the fact that energy is conserved, in practice, how do I use this to integrate the equations of motion? In particle non-relativistic physics, I use it by saying that the energy is E plus V, T is the kinetic energy, V is the potential energy, add those two and equate it to E. Here I use something a little bit different, but as we'll see, the final result is very analogous. And what we'll use is the fact that P mu is minus m squared, which is of course the same as the equation u mu is minus 1 for a massive particle. Okay. This equation actually is still true when m is 0. This equation is no longer true when m is 0 because this u has been defined by scaling out m from p. So that kind of thing we'll come back to in the following lecture. We just use this, and it turns out that this equation itself is the first integral of the geodesic equation. You can sort of guess that this would be the case because if you think about it, this equation can be written g mu nu dx mu by d tau dx mu by d tau equals 0 equals minus 1. That's the definition of this. right? Because u mu has its indices up, we have to lower it with g. Now supposing I took a derivative of this, partial derivative in some any direction alpha, that's 0 because the right side is constant. But ordinary derivative acts as covariant derivative on this times that, plus this times covariant derivative on that, and covariant derivative of g is 0. So you only get a contribution from covariant derivative of dx mu by d tau projected back along the velocity vector, and that's nothing but the geodesic equation. Okay, so so let's do it. Del alpha equals, so this is 0 from the right hand side, but it's also equal from distributivity of the derivative to this plus twice g mu nu u nu d alpha u nu. Okay. Now we've already shown that, so this is 0, and we've already shown that u mu d alpha u nu contracted with g mu nu, that being 0, is the geodesic equation. I hope you haven't forgotten that. So this is equal to twice u mu d alpha mu, which is the LHS of the geodesic equation. Okay. Actually, no, I think this is not correct. So this statement, geodesic equation is u mu d mu of u alpha equals 0. The indices are written here. So that's not correct. Sorry. But I think this is still 0 along the geodesic. Is that right? See, the geodesic equation is u mu d mu on u nu equals 0. Yes. Tell me.
Partial relativity is the geodesic straight lines.
Yes.
Acceleration is perpendicular to velocity.
Yes.
D mu
Thank you.
is a covariant acceleration.
Thank you. That looks reasonable.
That is perpendicular. U mu saying special relativity, the dot product of the acceleration is 0. This is like the dot product of the acceleration.
It is. But does this literally imply the geodesic equation?
But that does not imply geodesic.
Yeah, I'm beginning to think it might not. Okay, that may not matter. Anyway, the point is this equation is certainly true, so this equation is true. Okay, so let's solve this equation and then we'll see whether it solves the geodesic equation or not. I believe it does. Actually I know what. Okay, let's go ahead by solving this equation. This is still a fact. Okay, but I'm not exactly sure what we can conclude from it. Nevertheless, let's just go ahead and solve this equation. Okay, this equation is g mu nu u mu u nu equals -1. So in our metric, the important thing I want to stress is that this equation is a first order equation. Okay, in the sense it has only first order time derivatives on x. So the value, this being true, is very similar to the energy integral equation that we get in classical mechanics, and by using the Killing vectors of this, we'll in fact be able to write this as an energy integral equation. So let's do that. For that, again, I needed to write the Killing vectors. First, let's write out the equation. So we need the form of the metric, which is written here. So the first term is minus 1 minus 2gm upon r ut squared. The second term is plus 1 over 1 minus 2gm by r squared. The third term would involve u theta squared, that is d theta by d tau, but we've decided to set theta to pi by 2, so there is no d theta by theta contribution. The last term is there. The last term is r squared sine squared theta, but sine squared theta is 1 again. So r squared u phi squared, this whole thing is equal to minus 1. Okay, so this is the content of the fact that p squared is minus m squared or u squared is minus 1 for a massless particle. And now let's see which of these terms, the terms in this equation, are determined by Killing vectors. So for that, notice that if k mu upper is the time-like Killing vector, that implies that k mu lower with that metric is minus 1 minus 2 gm upon r, comma 0, 0, 0. Okay. Therefore, k mu u mu, which is the energy, actually k mu p mu, k mu p mu is the same as m times k mu u mu, and this is m times minus m times 1 minus 2 g m by r times u t. This is the conserved energy. Okay. Small m is the mass of the orbiting particle which we are trying to study, while capital M is the mass of the star or planet, the spherically symmetric body, the total mass of which. Okay, so clearly we can use this over here. If we multiply the equation through by 1 minus 2 gm, then this term will be the square of the energy. Before that, let's also identify similarly the angular momentum. This is r mu p mu, where r, when the index was up, was 0,001, but now the index has to be down, so it's r squared u phi squared. Again, there's a sine squared theta, but theta is pi by 2. That allows us to replace this term in the equation by a Killing vector, by a conserved quantity. So this is gone, this is gone, this is the only thing that's left, but this is dr by d tau, or r dot. So when we solve that, we'll find the radial motion r as a function of the proper time, which is what we want. So this is how the analog of finding a first integral of equations of motion works here, modulo my tiny confusion about why this thing solves the geodesic equation, which we'll come back to in a moment. Okay. Good, so we need to multiply this equation through and reorganize it slightly. So we multiply it by 1 minus 2 gm over r. Let me actually do it as it is in my notes. Easier. Yes. So we'll multiply it by 1 minus 2 gm over r first, and we'll get minus 1 minus 2 gm over r whole square dt square, sorry, u square, ut square, plus in the second term that factors just cancel, so we get ur square, and in the third term we have 1 minus 2 gm over r square u phi square, and this whole thing is minus 1, is minus, I should bring writing on this board, okay, plus, so I'll bring the minus 1 to the other side, add it to this, so it's 1 minus 2 gm over r times r square u phi square plus 1, and this is equal to 0. Okay, and now I use the Killing vectors. So this whole quantity is E divided by M, the whole square, the first term. So minus E by M square, that's the energy of the particle divided by its mass. Okay, the whole thing square. The second.
Here, why the studies involved?
Sorry? Yo, that's just because that's important. Thank you. Okay. The second term is r dot squared, and the third term is plus 1 minus 2 gm upon r. This thing is, I forgot the factor of m here. Again, to convert p to u, you need to multiply by m. And so this thing is angular momentum L squared upon m squared r. So there's r squared u phi squared, but actually L is, I wrote this all wrong actually, sorry. It's linear in preview, so it's m r squared u phi. Right? Proportional to p, and r mu has a component only in the phi direction, so we get u phi. Good. So therefore, in fact, this is L squared upon m squared r squared plus 2. And now if you stare at this equation, you see that it's going to be equivalent to some sort of classical mechanics problem of the form T plus V equals E, where we have to suitably identify each of the terms. In order to do that, let me multiply the whole equation again by m over 2, half the mass of the particle. So the first term is m over 2 r dot squared, so that's like an energy term in some one-dimensional radial problem. Kinetic energy term in a one-dimensional radial problem. Okay. Next, I will write down these 4 terms, except that the 1 I'll be taking on the other side of the equation because it's a constant. So, and all the other 3 terms need to be multiplied by small m over 2. So I'll write down the answer. This is the first term. This comes from this times the 1 here and times m by 2, which removes the 2. Okay. Then the next term is L squared by 2m r squared, and the third term is gml squared by m. That's the left side of the equation. The right side of the equation comes by taking this to the other side. So it becomes E squared by 2m minus, and then I take this 1 to the other side. So at the end it becomes that. Is it clear what I've done? I've combined 2 steps. One is I've expanded out everything and taken some terms to the other side. Others I multiplied the whole equation by m over 2. Okay? Good. So now it's very tempting to interpret this as the kinetic energy of an ordinary non-relativistic particle, and this thing as the potential. So let V of r be minus gmm over r plus L squared over 2m r squared minus gm L squared over m r cubed. And let some new energy be E squared over 2m minus m by 2. In that case, this equation is half m r dot squared plus V of r equals E, and we know how to solve it. In fact, we still don't know how to solve it in the sense that we have to put this the other side, take a square root and all that, but it's an elementary it's an elementary integral in one variable, so we can write it down. It might turn out to be expressible in some special functions. What is really nice about this equation, besides the fact that we can solve it, is that we can just stare at it and find out everything we want to know about the particle. For example, we can see that if V has a minimum and if we choose E equals V, then r dot will remain 0, which means we'll have a circular orbit. Okay, this is all stuff that we've done in Newtonian gravity. In finding out orbits. Okay, then we know that if it's not a circular orbit, you're slightly off the minimum, but the E is low enough, then there will be a bounded orbit from both sides. Then we know that if you send the particle from infinity with an energy above the barrier, then it will hit some inner barrier and come back. All kinds of things we know about this. We've got the same thing, only thing this potential looks different and the energy also looks different. So before we go and solve it, let's ask ourselves, isn't it strange that there's an equivalent problem? Equivalent problem means some kind of fake problem with a fake potential and energy such that it looks like a classical mechanics problem. Is it just that it looks like it, or in some way it really is that problem? Okay. So the way to address that is to ask what happens if I take this system and go to the Newtonian limit. Okay. Of course, in the Newtonian limit, I should do the calculation from first principles, and there I find an equation which you've already probably found long ago, but which is very similar to this and slightly different. In Newtonian gravity, there you don't start from this point of view at all. You start from first principles, the Newtonian equations, the central force, and you solve the motion of orbits of a particle in that force. And what you find there, as is extremely well known, is that half m r dot square plus v Newtonian of r is equal to E Newtonian, where Vn of r is the Newtonian potential minus gmm upon r plus the centrifugal barrier L square over 2mr square. So what are the differences between this equation and this equation? You see, they are really almost the same, except that the Newtonian potential has two terms, while the true potential from Schwarzschild has three terms. Okay. By the way, this is not an approximate answer. This is an exact answer from the Schwarzschild metric. We have made no approximation today at all. Okay. So there is an exact extra term here compared to the Newtonian theory. What about the right side? How come this energy looks different from this strange thing? Well, in the Newtonian theory or in relativistic theory, the energy is really the rest mass plus whatever else is there is called the Newtonian energy. Definition of energy in relativistic theory includes rest mass, but in Newtonian theory it doesn't. Okay. Moreover, En, for this to be valid, En would be typically much less than m. So if you plug this in to that expression, then you find the effective energy we found there is m plus the Newtonian energy square divided by 2m minus m by 2, and guess what? This is exactly, it's not exactly, it's approximately in this approximation the Newtonian. So it is the same equation. The right hand side has changed simply to accommodate what the definition of what we mean by energy in general relativity, and what we mean by energy henceforth can only be the conserved quantity k mu p mu. There is no other definition of energy, so that's the definition of energy. Okay. However, since the Schwarzschild metric which I have erased goes to flat space-time at infinity that definition agrees with the normal special relativistic definition of energy. So there's nothing very mysterious, and the only thing that's really striking is that this term is there and it's not there in the Newtonian case. So this is the single most interesting thing that we've discovered in this course, because it's a very, very precise point of departure of general relativistic physics for a massive object circulating around a star or a planet or anything spherically symmetric. It's a departure from Newton's laws, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be measurable. Okay. It's also interesting to ask whether it's a small departure or a large departure. Of course, it's a very small departure if r is very large on the scale of all these other things. And that's going to be the scale when we talk about motion of objects around planets or stars, because after all, we have always got this restriction that everything we are doing is valid only if r is greater than r tilde, the matter distribution radius. And that radius is going to be very large. So in that case, this is going to be small. So it might mark a small departure from Newton's laws, and that's good, because a large departure from Newton's laws in a domain which is already studied for centuries before would be very odd indeed. On the other hand, if we were in an object such as a black hole, just to anticipate, where R is allowed to come as small as we like up to order 2 GM. Below 2 GM we have to worry, but after 2 GM there is no problem. Then this term could be very large. It could be the dominant term. Okay, so we expect two different things that are characteristic of general relativity. One, small deviations at large distances from the object. Two, possibly qualitatively different behavior very close to the object, if we are allowed to go. So these are two different things, and we'll examine them in turn. Actually, the second thing we won't examine today, because we'll be talking about black holes as a separate subject, where this will be a starting point, but we'll have to orient ourselves for that. Here, this is script. Thank you. Good. Okay. Now, when solving this equation and when plotting V, I'm going to plot V all over the range from 0 to infinity, but you always have in your mind that there's a screen, a wall at R equals RC. Less than that, it's not that we can't go, it's just that the Schwarzschild metric isn't valid if we are a planet, if we are the Earth or a planet or a star. So we mustn't go into that in that case. But there's nothing stops me plotting it anyway. So with that reservation, please keep that reservation in mind. So now let's plot. This will give us more information, useful information than any amount of mathematical solutions. First, let's plot V Newtonian. We know this, but let's plot it anyway to remind ourselves. Here's R, here's V. At infinity it goes to 0. So at infinity V goes to 0. And 0, it diverges in a positive infinity. Okay. Now there's not much it can do between the two. It can have one turning point. So basically what it will do is something like this. Okay. And of course, the turning point here is where V prime R is equal to 0. And since this is 1 by R and 1 by R squared behavior, you will get a single solution for R. Okay, the very simple solution, and that solution is R critical equals L by M squared 1 by GM. If you think about units, R has units of length. GM, of course, is the 2 GM is the Schwarzschild radius, that's also a unit of length. L by M in these units also has unit of length. So it's length squared over length is a length. And you can see that the two scales in this problem are L by M and GM. These are two independent length scales. One is fixed by the mass of the star, the other is fixed by the angular momentum of the probing particle relative to its mass. So if you like, angular momentum per unit mass of the probing particle. And clearly I can do what I like with this while keeping that one fixed, or vice versa. Okay. But the important thing is there's always such an R critical for all values except 0 of these two things. Okay, so there's always a turning point. All that happens is that as I crank up the angular momentum, this curve starts to look more and more like this. Okay, and as I crank it down, it looks like this. It's true that it becomes a bit sick when L is exactly 0, because at that time then it goes straight down. So this we know as the fact that anything with exactly 0 angular momentum formally would go straight into the center, but every other thing with any angular momentum, however small, has a nice centrifugal barrier which saves it from falling into the center. Good. That's the Newtonian answer. And now let's do the same thing with this extra term. So I'll rewrite it here. Okay, and last comment is that of course this point is always there. So if the particle is placed here, we get circular motion. If the particle has an energy which is like this, then we get motion with two boundaries, so back and forth. If the energy is above 0, then we hit this barrier and we get reflected back out to infinity. Now, this is only the radial motion. We need to, in Newtonian physics, we need to plug this back into the equations of motion to determine the angular motion. When you do that, then you find that this one, for example, is an ellipse, which is a particular thing. It didn't have to be an ellipse, but in Newton's theory, because of the exact nature of the force law, it's an ellipse. Okay, so all those are extra details you find, but the first thing you do is solve the radial motion, and then you find out all the other things. Similarly, if the motion is unbounded, then actually what's happening is something like a comet is coming, zooming in from infinity and swinging around the planet and going back to infinity. But its angular motion you still need to find as a function of time. But those are in some sense mathematical details. You can even do them numerically. As long as you have a picture that there are three types of motion. Circular, well, there are really only two types. Circular at RC, more generally bounded. Elliptic, around RC, unbounded. So the first two are the same, of course. The circle is just same conceptually. Circle is just a degenerate ellipse. But anyway, these are the types. So now we want to study the general relativistic, which is this. And now the all important correction term, which is right. No, there's a 2 wrong now.
This written.
It's written. Good. So this is what we want to plot. And notice right away that at r equals 0, it has exactly the opposite behavior from that. The curves of V of R, yes, I think it's time to start up. So shall I just boot up the, I think I'll be done in 10 minutes. The announcement is in 15 minutes. But maybe I'll boot this thing up. Is it plugged in? Side. Here. Oh, full. Okay, good. Take it. Good. So you see that at r equals 0, it's exactly the opposite behavior. So here's evidence of something I said. The general relativity says something completely different from Newtonian gravity at short distances. Of course, r equals 0 anyway is not included in our discussion because we didn't have the courage to go beyond r equals 2 gm. Okay, but up to r equals 2 gm we can go. And so let's plot this. It's going to go down. At the same time, of course, at infinity, it's going to go to 0, just like that one. Okay. Now, what are its choices? If it's here and it goes to 0 at infinity, and there are 3 terms. So when we solve for r critical, we'll have 2 roots. So it has 2 turning points. So the generic behavior will be something like this. Okay. So they're going to, this we can do without any discussion. We can guess that this is what is going to be. And for different L, these curves will change, but basically there will be these 2 turning points, unless the quadratic equation we get from there doesn't have real roots. Okay, then there will be no turning point. So let's take a look at that. It's quite amusing and instructive, and we get some classic results. Also, of course, you should always keep in mind that a person who is sufficiently far away can't tell much of a difference between this and that picture. So what we understand is that this thing trying to go up to here, looks like the Newtonian potential. You have to be really very close to find that it's actually going down. Okay, but even here there will be deviations, but then they will be of a very perturbative nature, very tiny. Okay, so let's solve the equation dv. So v prime equals 0 for RC. This time it's very easy to do, and you'll get a quadratic equation. So we get that RC is L by m squared plus or minus L by m. Well, maybe I'll write it in a more convenient way. L by m squared over 2gm 1 plus or minus square root of 1 minus 12 So remember that L by M and GM have the same dimensions. So this is a dimensionless number. And now this gives me two turning points, which are obviously these. I don't need to do any further analysis to tell that the inner one is unstable and the outer one is stable. It can't be otherwise for a potential which goes to minus infinity. Good. Okay, so two turning points. Inner one unstable and outer one stable, but only if the square root is real. So for L by M greater than or equal to root 12 GM. This is a strict condition. So only if the angular momentum is sufficiently large in units of the Schwarzschild radius, not very large, it just has to be, this is root 3 times the Schwarzschild radius. So it's a precise number. If the angular momentum is more than root 3 times the Schwarzschild radius, then we have two turning points, one stable, one unstable. Okay. Now we can get a bound on the outer turning point. So RC plus, which is with the plus sign, is obviously greater than L by M squared over 2GM, the first term. Okay? And of course in this I can use this bound, because otherwise I wouldn't have any RC plus to discuss. And this would give me 6, which in turn is greater than 6GM, plugging in this bound. So we learn that the smallest possible circular orbit is at 6G. Equals 60. Okay. The other thing that we can study is the case when L by M is very, very large. Okay. When it's very, very large, what will happen is that this point will migrate out and this point will migrate in. Okay. And when this point will migrate out with no limit, this point will migrate in and reach some limit. So let's find out that limit. That just by doing the limit, L goes to infinity, L by M goes to infinity, and expand this square root and keep only the first term.